Hi, and welcome to our JavaScript project course where we're going to be constructing this calculator dynamically using only JavaScript and building this project out from scratch. My name is Lawrence. I'm going to be your instructor for this course. I come to you with many years of web development experience, and I'm ready to help you learn more about JavaScript. And JavaScript is one of my favorite programming languages to work with. This course is designed to give you an opportunity to practice, learn more about JavaScript, including DOM manipulation, apply logic to build a mini simple application project such as this calculator. This calculator is all JavaScript. When we look at the HTML, there's nothing in the HTML. It's simply linking out to a JS file. So the JavaScript is handling everything. It's updating the page title. It's doing all of the visuals within the DOM, creating all of these elements on the fly, as well as handling all of the logic behind the scenes that makes the calculator function. So we're able to do any one of these evaluations, make the calculations. The objective of this course is to get you to practice JavaScript, have some fun with JavaScript, and learn more about JavaScript and how you too can apply what's contained within the upcoming lessons in your own projects. To extend on the project that's being presented, source code is included, and I do advise that you try the source code out and get a feel for what's happening within the lessons to get a better understanding of what you can do with JavaScript and how it can be applied within your own application. HTML, CSS, and of course JavaScript are prerequisites to this course, so you do need to know JavaScript before embarking on the upcoming lessons. If you have any questions or comments, I'm always happy to help. I'm always happy to answer any questions you may have, as well as hear from you to clarify any of the content being presented in the upcoming lessons. One of the unique things about the upcoming course is that we're going to do everything with JavaScript. It's focused solely on JavaScript, so even applying any of the styling. So we're going to focus only on JavaScript and do everything with JavaScript. I know you're excited to get started, so let's dive right in and start creating this application from scratch. Hi there, in this lesson we're going to be setting up the basic structure of our application that we're building, and we're building a calculator that's going to be all JavaScript, so there's going to be no HTML, no CSS, and everything is going to be done via JavaScript. I've got my editor opened and I'm using brackets, so it's available at brackets.io. So go ahead, open up your editor and create an index file. Save it as index.html, and we're going to write all of the code within this one page. We need to first set up our HTML, and you can give it a title, calculator, JavaScript, and then within the body tags, or you can link to a script file. Actually, we'll link to a script source, which will be called app.js. And that's it. That's all the HTML code that we need for the index.html file. Next, create that app.js file, and this is where all of the JavaScript is going to go, so just app.js, and you're going to be ready to start the project. With brackets, you can do a live preview, or you can just go over to the index file that you opened up and open in your browser. The way that I'm going to be doing the upcoming lessons is I'm going to have the brackets on the left-hand side, so the editor on the left-hand side, and the browser window opened on the right-hand side. I'm also going to be using the developer tools, so using inspect and opening up the console at the bottom so we can do some debugging of the application. And once you're set up and ready to go, I'm also including all of the source code, as I do suggest that you try the code out as you move through the lessons. So once you're up and ready to go, you're ready to move on to the next lesson where we're going to be creating our JavaScript application. So that's still to come in the next lesson. Hey there, in this lesson, we're going to be looking at DOM content loaded event. So this is an event listener that fires off whenever the initial HTML document has completely loaded and parsed. And this is the best way to make sure that the document object is loaded and ready to go. And especially when you're adding in and updating, manipulating those elements within the page, you want to make sure that those elements are present before you try to make some updates to it. So that's where we add in the window add event listener DOM content loaded, and then we can specify which function we want to run whenever the DOM content has loaded. So let's add this into our project just to ensure that the DOM is ready to go before we try to add some content into the DOM. So this is the window object, and we're adding an event listener to the window object. So add event listener, and the event that we're listening for is DOM DOM content loaded. And then whenever it's loaded, then we can invoke a function. And we're going to run the function init and set up the init function. And for now, we're going to put within the console that the page is ready. And if you're familiar with jQuery, then you're familiar with the document ready running, and this is running off the same principle as the DOM content loaded. So whenever the page is loaded, you're going to see ready within the console, and that means that you're ready to interact with the elements within the HTML page within those DOM elements and make some updates as well as manipulate them. So make sure you add this in, and you're going to be ready to move on to the next lesson. This lesson, we're going to be setting up some of the variables that we're going to use in the upcoming lessons to construct our calculator. So going into the function init, so this was our main function init. You can also set up the values outside as well. And you can also update the JavaScript title, the page title. So let's do that. So we're going to do everything via JavaScript because, of course, this is a JavaScript lesson. So whenever the document has loaded, then we can access the document object and update the title for the document object, and we'll call it JavaScript project. Save, and you can see that immediately the title of the page changes to JavaScript project. And as well, if you go to inspect, and if you scroll up to within the head section, you can see that the title has now been changed. So this is all done dynamically with JavaScript, and we want to focus as much as possible on JavaScript. But we can also set up some of the variables to sit outside of JavaScript, so sit outside of the init function, and this would be just sitting as global options. So let's set those up, and you can also put these inside of the init because the whole package and all of that content is going to be contained within the init. So this is an optional where you place that. So this is going to be our array object, and it's going to contain all of the keys that we're going to need for the calculator. So we need a multiplication. We also need a division. And these are all of the typical ones that you would expect to see. So it actually doesn't have to be in any particular order, but although this is the order that it's going to be presented on the page. And then, of course, we need all of the values of the numbers of the digits. Don't forget the 0 and the decimal place as well. So we have those options as keys. And then we also have some specific keys. And these are the keys that are going to actually function a little bit differently because we have to be mindful of these keys. We could take from the opts and use the first 4, but in case that changes dynamically, it's always better to have that in separate arrays. So you could do it either way, either or, but then just if you do make it working off the opts array, you have to be mindful that if you do make some changes that it might affect your application. So the best way to do it is to keep both of these separate, and these are special function keys, and really we're going to have to watch for these keys being pressed when we're using decimal places so that we know that these are when the calculations are actually going to be taking place. And the reason for adding this and keeping it separate is going to make more sense as you progress through the lessons coming up. So once we are ready and we've updated the title and our document is ready, we're ready to start constructing our page object, our container. So that's coming up in the next lesson. So go ahead and set up, update the title of your project, and create both of these arrays so that you can be ready to load this content into your calculator. And that's coming up in the next lesson where we start updating the DOM and outputting content within the visible area of your web page. This is a lesson where all of the fun begins because we can actually start seeing some of the visual content that's going to be output on the page as we loop through our basic variable arrays that we're going to use in order to construct and determine what we're outputting on the page. So we've got those in place, and let's next we'll create a constructor or a container. This is our main container object, and using the document create element, this allows us to use the document object to create elements dynamically. And in this case, let's create a div. This is going to be our main container that's going to hold all of the whole calculator. So we'll just call that container. And then once we've got it within the container object, we can update some of the properties to it. So if we wanted to add, we can add a class list to it. So we've got, we're not going to have anything within the classes, but we can add some styling if we wanted to in this case as well and call it container. So it's going to add a class of container to there. And then also let's specify using the style, JavaScript styling, specifying what our max width is going to be for this element. And don't forget to include the pics. So just as you would with a CSS, you need to specify that. And this is all one string object. So oftentimes you're going to see that sometimes people will make mistakes and they'll just put 600 and they'll forget the pics. So make sure that you do put the pics in there in order for it to be a valid value that can be handled into the style. So next, doing a margin. And you can set up all of the style as needed. We're going to set it to margin auto, so this will center the container. And then once we've constructed the container, we're ready to add it to the body. And you don't have to actually select the body tag separately. You can just do document body, because this is automatically done, and contain the container object in it. And of course, container isn't going to have anything in it quite yet. But if you do go into the inspect of the elements, you're going to see that you have a div with a class of container, a max width style of 600, and a margin of auto. So that's exactly what we wanted to be contained within the container. And that means that we're ready to continue to construct the elements. And you can do it the same way as we just saw, where we've got our main output area. So this is essentially going to be the screen output, and using the create element once again, with this time creating an input element. And this is going to be a great exercise in constructing and creating elements dynamically. And I'll show you quite a bit that you can do. So you can set attributes. So we know with inputs, they've got a series of attributes that are going to be associated with it. So we just use the set attribute method, and we want to specify the type of attribute, and the type is going to be text. And remember, this is an input, so it does need some of these attributes in order to be more specific as to what it is. You can also add a class to it. Now, this isn't going to be necessary because we're doing all the styling with JavaScript. And of course, it's much easier to do it with CSS than to do it with JavaScript. So I'm adding these in just in case you want to be able to reference these elements, but they are going to be as objects within our main init function, and the whole application is going to run within init. So we can always reference that element that we created with the variable that we've set up that's going to reference it. Let's also set for output, update some of the style properties. So we'll set style and width. And so we can set the width to be 100% because we already have a max width for its max container. So it's not going to go below or above 100 pics. And it'll be a little bit more dynamic if we're looking on a mobile device as well. So there's output style, and there's a few other properties that I did want to set. So line height is one of them, so that we can center the content, the text content. So line height of 50, and then output style. And of course, you can style these as needed. Let's set a font size, and the font size can be 3 EM. I was going to do 2, but let's do 3, so it's nice and big. And then output style, and typically for a calculator it's going to pull it over to the right hand side, so that's where we can use text align, and that will align it on the right hand side. So once you've constructed it, you can take the main container object, because remember, we've got the container that we've constructed over here. We've already added it in and appended it to body, but now we can add into that container object because we still have it as an available object that we can select because it's all contained within that init function. So next we just simply put output. And before we do that, make sure that this is document. That just said doc, not sure why. So there's our main input. And you can see that all of the styling has been applied. It's pulled over to the right-hand side, and it's ready to receive data from our application. So let's add in a few more things where we need to set up another container object, and we can call this one main. So this is going to be a container that's going to contain all of the keys for the calculator. So again, using create element, and this one can be a div as well. And we can add a class to it, a class list, add main, and then let's set up a style width to it. And the width for this one can be 100% as well. And so now the same thing that we just did several times before, we need to add it and append it to the container object or whichever element that we want to append it to. So just use the append child to append the element to the end of the node list. And this time we have that one as the main object. So now you can see when you go into inspect, we've got all of the elements that we need in order to continue to build this. So we've got our input area. So this is where the text is going to go, where we're going to have all of the calculations. And whenever any user presses any of the keys, that information is going to go there. And then we have main, and this is just a div that's going to contain all of the keys that we want to use in our calculator. And we're going to loop through that array of options and construct the keys that way. So that's still all yet to come. And we're going to create a separate function in order to make these buttons. So again, this is all still yet to come in the upcoming lessons. So go ahead and add in and update your project to add the main container area. This is a container for the calculator. And then within there, add in the screen output area, and then a main area to house all of the keys for the calculator. And you can be ready to move on to the next lesson. Great job on making it this far into the course. Next, let's add in our keys. And we already have an array that we constructed called opts. And this contains all of the keys that we want for our calculator. We can use for each in order to iterate through all of the keys. And then using function, we'll take the value out of each one of those elements. So if we console log out val, you can see that val represents each one of those items that are within that array. And that's exactly what we want, because we want to output these as keys. And we're going to set this up as a function, because otherwise we'd have to write the code, and it's quite a bit that we want to add in here if we want it to make some adjustments to styling and so on. So it's better to break it out and have a separate function for this. So what we want to do is send the value, and then also the actual function that we want to get invoked when the button gets clicked. And then sending that out as well, we can set up a function on the outside of function, and this will handle the button when it gets clicked, and we can add output and taking in the event object, and we'll console log out that event object. So that's a placeholder for later on as we're adding in these buttons. So let's set up the function that's going to handle the making of the button. So it's the button maker function. And it's taking in two parameters. So one is going to be the text that's taking in, and the other is going to be the function that's going to be associated with that button. So this gives us some dynamic ability in case we want to update the different functions or have something different happen as well. We have a little bit of flexibility. So let's create an element, and using the document create elements. So just as we did before, we're going to create an element. And the element that we're going to create is going to be a button. And then populating the buttons with, so now we've got it within the btn object. Let's set an attribute for the button and setting the type as button. Or if it was an input, it would need type as button. So button would be a button. But you could set attributes either way. And so button style width is going to be 23 pixels. Or 23%. Let's keep it at a percentage so that it makes our screen flexible. Setting our style and line height. So again, so we can center that content, and we'll set it at 50 pixels. Button style and margin. So we're going with the dynamic where we can extend on it. So we've got 23% width. We'll keep the margin at 1%. So that will give us 4 per row across 100%. And then also button style, and let's set a font size for this. So font size can be 2em, and then button. Now we're going to set some values in the back, and all of these elements on the page within the DOM, so these are all objects. So that means that you can set values in them. So these can be hidden values, or they can be visible values to the player. So text content is going to be visible on the element itself. So add in the txt value so that the player can see it and use it. And then also let's add an event listener. So this is adding in the function. On click, we're going to add in whatever the my function was. So we're dynamically constructing these and adding all of the functions. And then they're all going to be added in and append child. And we're appending that button to the main object. So the main object is the one that's going to be sitting outside, and that's the one we constructed in the last lesson. So save and refresh, and we get our calculator the way that's going to look. And you can see as well that when I clear this, I get the event objects whenever we click on that. So that's coming up next, where we're going to handle the click of the event object and adding in the text into the output area. So go ahead and set up the buttons, do it dynamically, running through a loop of the array content, and construct the buttons in this type of format. And you're going to be ready to move on to the next lesson. And now you should have the full calculator, the way that's going to be visible to the user. And next we need to update all of the functionality and what's going to happen behind the scenes to make the calculator work. So that's in the upcoming lessons. Hey, welcome back. And now we are ready to start applying some logic and functionality to our calculator, where we want to be able to add some of that output on the page and output that content. So let's first, we've got our target that we want to pick up. So whatever key initiated that event is the event target key. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to remove out some of this that we're outputting into the console because it's getting a little confusing. So let's just save that and go back in and refresh. And now when we click the keys, you're going to see that I'm getting that whole element. So there's a number of different ways to get whatever content is being contained within that element. So we've got it hidden within the VAL, as well as we've got it within the text content. So either way, you can get that information and determine what key is pressed. So now whenever the keys get pressed, I get a string value for the keys. So let's dump that into a variable. We'll call it character, and that's going to be coming from the E target, so whatever element initiated that event, and we're going to pick up the value of it. So this is going to give us the value to work with. And because we want to write to that output input tag, let's select that because we don't have that globally, and we won't be able to access it outside of the init. So let's move this one into the init function where we've got the button maker and the other functions that we're going to be producing. So now we can access the output value because that's contained within init, or we could return the output from init. So there's a number of different ways to handle this. So now we can take output and we can set the value of output, and setting the value of output to equal adding in whatever the value of the character that's been pressed. So save that, and now whenever we press any of the characters, we get the output updating. So notice that we need to add in a few more keys on our keyboard to clear and then also to evaluate whatever is within the output. So that's still all yet to come in the upcoming lessons. Hey, welcome back. Now in this lesson, we're going to add the equal sign so that we can actually do a calculation of the content that's being output on the input screen there. So we can type in and we can do all of this input into our screen, but we have no way to evaluate it. So that's what we're going to add in this lesson, the option to evaluate it. So where we're constructing the calculator object, this is where we can add in the ability to do a clear as well as an equal sign. So passing in and using the button maker function. And this was created dynamically enough that we can add an equal sign. So this should actually be an equal sign. And then also let's pass in the function so that it gets clicked. We're going to evaluate the output. And then we should also add in one more button under button maker. And this is just going to be a clear button. So allowing the user to clear the output. So we evaluate the output and clear the output. And that means that we need to create functions in order to handle that. So once we add those, and we can see that the functions are not yet created, obviously. So let's create those functions in order to handle the evaluation part. So evaluate output. For now, let's just do some placeholder functions so that we don't throw an error, and save. So there's our equal sign and there's our clear function. So let's make something happen with those buttons. So within the evaluation option, we can console log out. And so this is where we're actually doing our evaluation. So there's a few things that we need to check for the evaluation. And we want to make sure that there is an output. So make sure that output does have a value. And if it doesn't have a value, so we're checking to see if there is a value there so that we can evaluate it. And if there is no value, so if it has no value, then we're going to output the color. So update the style to be color, and we'll set it to red. And actually, if we don't have anything in there, if we do an equal sign, we don't see that it's gone red. So let's do something else, and we'll do the border and set the border to be red and set it to be equal to red so that the user knows that we're expecting something to happen. So it's going red. And we should also update this if it's a valid click just to be black. So any of the other ones that it's being clicked on, so any of the other buttons, when it clicks the other buttons, then we're adding the output, but we're also going to update the border to be black so that that red border will go away. And if there's any error messages, so now we can click it, it goes red, but we see that now when I start clicking the buttons, it's going to go black again. And we're able to do an evaluation on what's contained within this function. So JavaScript does have an eval function. Let's take a quick look at what MDN has to say about it. And there is obviously a warning here that this is an easy way for there's a security risk with using eval. So do keep that in mind as well. So what eval does is it takes in a string value and it does an evaluation. So we've got 2 plus 2 and it evaluates that string and calculates it out to be 4. You can do it a number of different ways and you can add in a number of different strings. So it's expecting a string value, and that's why we're able to use the input value to do the eval. And there's a number of examples here and a whole bunch of different things that you can do with eval. So we're using it for a very basic function, and that's to do the calculation and whatever is contained within the output, and then update that output value. So we're taking our output value and we're going to update the output value with an eval of whatever the current output value is. So let's see how that works. So now we've got our calculator, and if I do 4 plus 4 and do an equal sign, we see we've got the evaluation of what's happening there. So there are a few things that we need to still add in, some bug fixes, and well, of course we need to also add in the clear option. So the clear option is actually a very easy one where it's just going to simply clear out the click of the content. So output and value is just going to be equal to blank. So that's a really easy one to add in. And then also, because we're setting the border to red, on all of these clicks, we need to set the border to be black by default. So it's going to always go black, and then once we complete the check there, we might set it to red as well if there's any errors or issues. And there could be a number of other potential errors and issues. So let's try out a few calculations. Everything seems to work pretty good. So there are a few things that we need to account for. Let's try the clear. The clear works as well. And now whenever we have decimal places, you'll notice that we can add a number of different decimal places. So that's not good because that's going to throw an error on our evaluation because it's not a real number. You can't have decimal, decimal. So there are a few different little quirks and bugs that we still need to work through, and we're going to handle those in the upcoming lessons. So for now, go ahead and add in the equal sign and the clear button functionality into your calculator, and you'll be ready to move on to the next lesson. Hey, welcome back. So this lesson, we need to handle a few of the bugs. So notice that we can do 4 decimal 4 decimal 4 decimal 4, and then if we do an eval on that, we're going to throw an error. So there's definitely a problem there, and running our calculator, we need to kind of look out for any type of bugs that might happen. So let's handle those bugs, and we're going to create a couple switches within the application as we're constructing it in order to handle any of those bugs. So updating those, and we can set those as values. So one can be decimal, and I'll set that as a default of false. And the other one can be eval. So that means that if we're ready for evaluation, we can handle those. So these are switches that we can turn on and off and apply some logic within the coding. And this is also the lesson where the additional array here is going to make sense within this one. So now that we've got our output, that we're adding in our output, we don't want to add in output if it already has a decimal within that particular string. So we need to be able to turn things on and off. So first of all, let's console log out the value of DEC. And this one obviously is going to be false. So whenever we hit any of the keys, it's always going to be false because we are picking up that the decimal there. So we need to do something with this function. So let's take a look, and we're going to check to see if character is equal to a decimal value. And if it is, then we need to do something with it. And we also want to check to see if decimal exists. And if it exists already, then we don't need to set it again. So we're going to just set the character to be blank, and we're not going to allow the user to output any more decimals. And then in order to communicate that we're having an error, we're going to update the border. and update that border color to be red so that the user knows that there's been an error thrown. And if we don't have, if des is false, then we're going to allow des to be true, and this is going to prevent us from adding any more decimal places into our output. So let's try that and do 4.4. So we allowed 1, and if we try to do any additional ones, we see we get the box going red, but we're still not clearing that car, and that's because we've got the character being added here at the top, so we have to do it after the condition. So try that one more time. So 4.4. So we got the 1 decimal place, but then we can't put any additional decimal places. So we've effectively been able to block that off. So, but we do want to have 4.4 plus 4.4. So this is blocking off the ability to add in an additional decimal place. Also have one more switch that we can turn on and off, and that's going to be the EVA switch. So after we've checked to see if it's a second decimal place or if a decimal place is the one that's been clicked, we're going to turn on and off the EVA switch. And every time that we click one of these top buttons here, either the multiplication, division, plus, or minus, we want to turn off the switch. So we want to turn off this the switch that's tracking the DESA. So this is where we needed that second switch, and that's checking to see if EVA is true. And if it's not true, then we're going to set the decimal place to be false. So that's going to allow us to add another decimal place in the output, and in order to complete our string value. In order to determine if that particular character is contained within the spec array, we're going to use the method called include. So it's going to simply look for the character value within the spec array, and if it's there, then it's going to set that to be false. So let's try that. 4 and then plus 4 plus 4. And so we can do the full evaluation and we're not throwing any errors. So I know this was a little bit of a tricky lesson. So if you're having any issues with it, don't forget you can use the console log to see what gets output here. So includes is a method to determine whether an array includes a certain value among its entities. So this is a quick and easy way to take an array and check to see a particular value is contained within that array. So that's all we're doing, and the array that we're using is that little array that we set up earlier, and these are the special character function keys that we got to be mindful of, and this is where we're resetting the decimal place. So go ahead and add this into your project, and we're going to finalize it in the upcoming lesson. In this lesson, we're going to conclude the calculator and walk through any of the final bugs that we might have. So always whenever you're building a project, make sure that you try it out. And there is still one more bug. We fixed out any additional problems that we might be having with decimal places, so we can still evaluate those values. But if we have one of these keys up here at the top, and if we click it and we do the evaluation, we're going to throw an error because it's expecting the end of input. So that's why that was another reason we need to monitor if these keys have been pressed. And we know we have a special switch for that switches the EVA on and off in order to handle any of those buttons that might be clicked. So if that was the last button to be clicked, we want to basically be able to disable the ability to press the equal sign. So we're checking to see if there's no value there, and also we're going to check to see, so we're going to add in else if condition, and the else if condition is going to check to see if EVA is true. And if it is, then we just want to throw an error. So we don't want to actually do the evaluation if the EVA is true. So we'll try that, and just to make sure that everything is working properly. So now we've got this, and if we do a plus and an equal sign, we get that red box around it. So maybe that's not enough of a illustration for the user. So let's create one more function in order to reset the color. We'll call it COutput. And it's going to take in a value, and the value is going to be whatever color we want to set it. So over here we're setting black, red, and we can also update the color value of the element as well. So updating the border and taking whatever the value of V is, and then adding one pick solid border. And then also we're going to do the output style, but this time we'll do the color, and we'll set the color to be whatever the value of V is. So that gives us an option to a lot easier update the colors. We don't actually need it here within the equal sign, but we do need it here where we're setting the different red errors. So whenever we're throwing an error, that's where we're going to need this function. So this is the C output function. So update all of these, and we'll set this one to be black. And then with the output as well, we're going to go black here and then red on the other ones. So anytime we're throwing an error, we've got an easy way to let the user know that something's gone wrong, that there's been an error that's been thrown. So let's try that, and let's do the equal sign, decimal, equal sign, plus equal sign, so it goes red. And now we type in additional characters. And if we try to do another decimal place, it's going to go red. So we do need the setting it back to black if we press the equal sign. So sometimes you do need to try it out a few times just to make sure that things are working as expected, and play through the different script and just make sure that it's acting and performing the way that you expected. So now that we've concluded any of the debugging, and as well, make sure that you use the console log to do any of the debugging. So if you're throwing any errors while you're making your calculations, or if you're clicking any of the buttons and you're throwing errors, you can use the console log to output that information before the error is being thrown in order to better troubleshoot any issues that you might be having with the application. If you have any questions or comments, I'm always happy to help within the Q&A section of the course. And I'm going to just do a quick run through of the source code before we conclude this lesson. So within the index page, it's very blank, very empty, and this is done on purpose because we want to set quite a bit of the stuff and do all of the project as much as possible using JavaScript. So going into the JavaScript itself, this is where we made sure that we waited for the DOM content to load before we launched the function that builds the calculator. So we waited DOM content loaded, added an event listener to the window object. We set up a couple of arrays that hold some data and predominantly the keys, and then the special keys that we got to watch out for. So those were the two arrays that we set. And then everything else is contained within init. We set the document title. We kept a couple of variables here that were within the init, globally within the init function within that scope, so that we could have some switches to turn on and off. Here we constructed the visual part, interacting with the DOM, updating the styles, and adding it to the page elements. Created the buttons using a loop through all of the available array items. And then we added the special function buttons, so the equal sign and the clear. So they had some special functions. They weren't being evaluated, but they were doing the evaluation, so triggering the evaluation as well as clearing the output. So we had some special functions for those buttons. We also added in a function here that could help with handle the errors. So you can add additional functionality if there's errors that are thrown. So anytime the errors are thrown, and if it's red, then we can have some additional functionality if needed. And if there's no errors thrown, then it's black, and we can update the color. So you can extend on that if you need to add additional error information for the user. So here we also have the evaluation. So this is what happens when you click the equal button. We want to make sure that the output value has a value before we allow the evaluation of the content. If there's no value, we're going to throw an error. If EVA has already been pressed, if one of these buttons is the last one within the output value, then we need to throw another error, and we can't do the evaluation until that's cleared up. Then the clear button, so this was just clearing the output. This was our button maker because we were making all of these buttons and we wanted to have some consistency in making the buttons. So we needed to know what was on the button, what value was represented on the button, and what function that would be added to the event listener. So all of this was just styling to construct, and then lastly added the event listener and then added it to the main page. And then this was the functionality within the add output. So this was all of the regular buttons, their functionality, all of the ones that could be evaluated, adding these in. And we were watching. So basically we started out by outputting the content. We noticed there's a few errors with decimal places. So we had to track the characters to check to see if there's decimal places. And we also had to track to see if one of these keys, special character keys, where it does the computation, was the last key that was pressed. And if it was, then we know that we can reset the decimal places, because this allows us to have more decimal places within the output value. And as well, we had to watch out for these. If they were the last character and the user pressed the equal sign, then we can't do the evaluation, otherwise we'd throw an error. So thanks again for taking the course. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you had an opportunity to try the code out. And I'll see you in the next one. Hey, I just want to add one more quick lesson to illustrate one of the bugs that I found in the application, and there's a really easy fix to this. So you notice that when you press the eval, and if we do something like 4.4 plus 3 and we do the eval, we end up with a decimal place. And we can also add additional decimal places. So we can add one more decimal place. So what we need to do is we need to detect whether the decimal place is within the string. And if it is, then we need to set one of the switches, the DEC switch, to be true, where we check to see if the evaluated content has the decimal place within it. So this will fix the issue where we've got the ability to add multiple decimal places, and we know from before that that's going to throw an error. So we're going to use the includes method, that same one that we used for the function, to see if a particular value was included within the array. You can also check to see if it's included within a string. So if des is going to be true if there is a string value or a decimal place within that value. So let's try it and do a quick refresh, and 4.4 plus 3, and then now if we do another decimal place, we see it goes red and we throw the error. So everything is working once again. So this was just a quick fix, quick add-on to troubleshoot the application, the calculator application.